Okay, so we're downloading, oh no, we're down in this one, productform.xlsm, and we'll go ahead and get that open. Maybe I'll go ahead and close the quote of the day. Okay, so here, this is actually a workbook that we worked with before, so we won't spend a whole lot of time on the data. It's product data. But as you're looking at this, let's suppose you have the task to update some of these things. It's not like you have to go through a whole column of data and change, like a manufacturer has changed his name, where you have to change all of the manufacturers that say one thing to another. Let's just say you've got to kind of look at each product information one at a time. So what's really bad about the organization of a spreadsheet for dealing with one product at a time in this context? There's something that's kind of, it's a mismatch. It doesn't really fit for dealing with a product. Why? If I'm interested in kind of looking at all the data for one product at a time, what's the problem? Okay, let me put some more emphasis on this. I want to see all the information for a product at once. What's the problem? Yeah, it's too wide. Well, I guess I could if I just shrunk it down, right? Control, I don't even know how to shrink on this keyboard. I could shrink it down, and then I could see it all. But then the problem is I can't really see it all because it's too small to read. So, and all the rest of the rows here are irrelevant to the task at hand. And so, spreadsheets are great, if you've got a model here, because you need multiple rows together and the whole thing's interacting. But when I've got kind of a set of data here and I want to deal with one row at a time, not really the best interface. And so we're going to learn a new kind of element in VBA that will allow us to say, listen, take these different columns that are all on this one row, and let's put them onto a square. Let's put them into a form. It's called the user form. And so let's go ahead and take a look at how we do that. So open up the code editor, Alt F11. All right, I think actually we have the module that we created in class, that one that did the, made a list, so would find the unique values. But we're not gonna be working there. Instead, we're gonna choose insert. Every time we've come to the insert menu so far, we've chosen a module. This time we're choosing a user form. So insert a user form. So I kind of feel the urge to zoom in here. Windows plus. There we go. Question here? Go ahead. The question is, are forms always going to be in a workbook, or can you have a form outside of a workbook? The only way to get a form outside of the workbook is you can export the definition of the form. So we could export this, and it could live in a separate file that I could then import into some other workbook, but it's got to be in a workbook for me to be able to open it. It has to be defined in a workbook. Okay, so this is, here it is. It's called the user form because it's a window that we can kind of put data on here as we please, and then we'll have to write code to actually make it be displayed to the user, but we can kind of shortcut that right here while we're in development mode just by clicking on the play button. So if the form is active and we click play, then that is just going to show the user form. Here it is. It's a pretty boring form right now. Nothing's on it. But that's the idea. We can just bring it right here in front of Excel, and then we can present information to the user. Information in a way that the user can edit it, and that's where we're headed. So I'll go ahead and close that, and it should bring me back into my VBA environment. So first thing to realize is that the user form itself is an object. So as an object, it has what? Properties and methods. And so one of the properties of a form, a user form, is the caption of that form. And so I'm going to go ahead and hopefully bring up my properties window where I can see it. Maybe. All right. Properties window. Oh, is this F4? I was pressing Control F4. That was no good. And let me also view my Project Explorer to get back to my form. That one is called Userform 1. We'll get to form product here in just a little bit today. There we go. Okay, so the user form is selected, and I can always tell which object I have selected. And we'll see if we have lots of objects we'll be working with here shortly, because right here at the top of my properties window, it tells me this is Userform 1, the name of the object, and the type of object that it is. Okay, but it has a caption property right here that I'm going to change this to be like product information. INF. And so that just controls what shows in the title bar of the form. Question in the back. Oh, do I know how to add a form on Mac Excel? Interesting. So no, can't add a form. I guess this is still a restriction in the Mac version. But what we're going to do is we're going to get started on this one. We're going to do a couple of things, and then we're going to switch over to the one that I've already got started. So that one you should be able to open and edit just fine. So if you're on a Mac right now, probably just sit back and watch for the first few minutes, and then when we switch to the form that's kind of pre-built a little bit, you'll be able to pick up and follow along. Okay? In fact, if you all just wanted to sit back and watch, that'd be okay too, because we're going to pick up to the one that I built here in just a moment. Okay, so the first thing is, there's really not that much to do with the form itself. The way we design the form is by putting other objects onto it. Now, the objects that we put onto a form they're a special kind of object called a control. The object itself is called a control. I have said control so many times now that it sounds like a normal thing to call an object, but I realize that seems like a weird thing to call it. But that's what it is. So here's how we got to open up the toolbox. So if you want to find the toolbox with the form selected, there's a tool in your toolbar that looks vaguely communist here. It's got a hammer crossed with a wrench. And if you click on that, it will bring up the toolbox. So these are the controls. It says controls here. These are the objects that we can put onto the form to make the form show something. And so let's look at the very first one here. The first one's called a label. Here, the way we put something onto the form is we select the control, we select that tool, and then we click and drag to draw the shape that we want that to be. So now I have another object on my form. Any object that sits on the form is a control, but it is an object. It's got properties, it has methods. And that's my phone ringing in class. Okay, so we have that label now in the upper left-hand corner. Now, a label allows me to put text onto the form. As a programmer, I can change what's in that label, but the user can't. As far as the user is concerned, this is just static text. So what I would like to do, and where I'm headed with this, is I would like to be able to bring up all the information for a particular product, put it onto the form, including what I have here in the first column, which is the ID, the product ID. So I'm going to give this particular control a name. It's a good habit to give your controls names. Now it already has a name, it's called label 1. But I would like the name of this control to be something more that when I see it referenced in the code, I go, okay, I know what I'm talking about. Because I might end up with a dozen labels on this form. And if I'm doing something to label number 17, well, I guess if I have a dozen, it'll be label number 9. I'd like it to be a little more clear what's the context for that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call this LBL, like a 3-digit prefix, just a convention to saying, hey, this object is a label. So when I see it in the code, I go, oh, it's a label, and then some context for it, ID. So this is the ID label. This is the label for the ID, LBL ID. And I'm going to change a couple more properties of this one. I would like this to, because right now it just kind of looks like the same color as the form. It's just going to be a number up there, and that would be okay. But I would like it to look more like a data field, even though the user can't change it. So let me just change a couple of properties here. I'm going to change the back color of this. I'll choose off the drop-down, and instead of the system, I'll come to palette. I'll just choose one of these. Oops, had the wrong thing selected. Undo. Can I undo that? I'm not sure what this was set to before. I know, I'm trying to get back to where it was. Maybe it was called window background. Nope. I don't think it was button face. Maybe it was. Is it? Button face. There we go. Okay, good. Yeah, I need. Okay, so there's a good rule. You got to have the object selected when you're changing the property of it. So now I have the label selected. I'm changing the background color to a little bit darker shade of gray. So on palette, I'm going to choose the third color down. I'll go ahead and put a border on it. So back style is opaque. That's fine. Border color is actually border color is fine. Border style I'll set to be single. So now if I click off of that, I can see that looks a little bit more like a data field. It's got some color. It's got a border around it. Right now it's label 1, but I'm going to change that so that when the user opens up this form, it's going to find out whatever row it's on, whatever row is the active row, and we're going to read the product ID off the active row and put it into the form. There's one more thing I'd like to do here, and that is I would like to set the horizontal alignment property, I think is, what's it called? Oh, make sure I'm on the label. Maybe it's just called text align or horizontal align. Where is it? It's called text align. I'm going to change that to be center. So change that to 2 just to center that. And the point is, these are the properties that I have that I can change at design time. These controls may have properties that are only available at runtime, but almost all of them are also available at design time, so you can just see what there is to change by looking at it here. So label is for static text. Now, if I want the user to be able to change something, I'm going to use a different control. That's the next control over. So let me come back to my toolbox. And it's this right here. It looks like a little box with an A, B, and an insertion point in it. I'm just going to bring that up here. And this will be for my product name. Now this is a text box, so I'm going to prefix this. I'm changing the name of this to txt name. So txt tells me it's a text box. Name lets me know it's something about the name of the product. So far, so good. And that's all the configuration I want to do on this particular one. Questions? All right, so now let's write some code. Actually, let's do one more thing before we start writing code. Let's bring in a button. So the button, depending on where you're configured, it looks like this, like a little A, B, and when you hover over it, it says command button. I'm going to just draw here a button in the bottom right-hand corner. And let me go ahead and get this button configured. So this is a command button. There's other kinds of buttons, option buttons and toggle buttons. So I'm going to call this CMD, short for command button, and then OK. My OK button. I am also going to change the caption of this to say OK. And I'll do one more thing, and that is I will change the default property from false to true. I can have one of my buttons set to be the default button. What do you think it means to be the default button? Well, it'll be the one that starts off selected. You may have noticed it has a darker border around it now, so that'll be the one that's kind of active. But the big thing is that if I'm working on this form and I hit enter, it will trigger that button. Just as if the user clicked on it, it'll trigger it by that way. Okay, so we kind of have the beginnings of a form here. But there's another concept now that's going to be new to us. When we've talked about objects so far, we have talked about objects having 2 characteristics. What are they? Properties and methods. There's one other characteristic that an object can have, and that is an event. An event in VBA is something that happens. So I can have lots of things. I can have lots of different kinds of code execute when different events happen to this button. So if you're just to guess the name of the event that happens when the user clicks on the button, what would you think the event is called? It's the click event. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to double click this button, and that will take me into the code editor. It turns out there's a module built into this form. So when we added this form, it also added a module that's a part of the form. And when I double click this button, it takes me to that module. And Windows minus. Here then is the sub procedure that is going to execute when the CMD OK object, that's the name we gave it, when this object receives the click event. And all I want to do is this. I want to tell this user form to close. Now, the name of this user form is Userform1. So here's how I'm going to do it. Userform1, name of the object, dot, Userform1, dot, and now I've got a method that I can put here. I'm going to use the one called hide. Maybe I'll use unload. Actually, I'll use hide. Unload's different. We'll talk about it here in a minute. So, as it turns out, the good folks who are making the VBA language said, you know what? If we have the name of this object sprinkled throughout the code, and we decide that we want to change the name of the form, what would that mean? We'd have to also go and change every reference to that form in the code. So this code would work just fine. In fact, here, let me just go ahead and prove it. Let me go ahead and run this. I'll click on OK, and that hides the form, closes our form. But I'm going to change this to a shortcut called me. Me is just, it's an alias. It's a synonym for whatever form contains the code. So it's actually preferred to use me instead of the name of the form, because that way if you change the name of the form, you don't have to go modify your code. So this will do the same thing. Okay, so far this seems pretty straightforward. Go ahead. Does me only work with forms? And the answer is, as far as I know, in VBA, that's the only use of the alias me, is to refer to the name of a form that contains the code, that contains that line of code. I've tried it in other places where I think it might work and it doesn't work. Okay, but click is only one of dozens? Maybe not quite dozens, but for many, 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 many events that this object could respond to. Let's just look at what some of them are. So we've pretty well ignored the two drop-down boxes that are in the top of our code editor. But when we start to work with user forms, these become really important. So if I'm going to try to write some code to respond to a different event happening to a different object, I can choose the object I'm interested in working with from this first list. So here are all the objects that I put on the form. One of them is the user form itself. One is txt name, lblid, and cmd OK. These are the objects that I created and named. Or I can have some that aren't the kind of sub-procedures that respond to event. There's a normal sub-procedure that I have to call if I want to make it do something. I can make those two. Those would show up in my general group. But I'm going to leave that on cmd OK, and then over here, this drop-down will show me the different events that this kind of control can respond to. Let's just take a look at a couple of them. I'll try to zoom in here as well. Okay, so one of them is before drag over. Really? Before drag over is an event? So I'm dragging something and kind of before it even starts dragging over it, I can trigger some code to run? That's exactly right. Before drop or paste, there's click, which we're done with. There's double click. We can make different code execute if you double click a button. If we enter it, so like if we just tab over and it gets the focus, we can make code execute. If that's the active button and if that's the active control and the user presses a key down, that's an event. When the key on the keyboard comes up, that's a different event. The key press is still different yet. Mouse down, I get it's a separate event. Just when the mouse goes down and it's over that button, I can trigger code to execute there. Mouse move, if the mouse cursor moves even 1 pixel over the face of that button, I can make code to execute. Or if the mouse button comes up. Let's do mouse move. This is kind of a fun one. Okay, so I lost my code. Where'd my code go? Let me get a little smaller. And if you're on the form and you want to get back to your code, you can double-click something, and that will try to write code for that thing you're double-clicking on. Or, well, it must be in my Project Explorer. Stand by. View, Project Explorer. Yeah. So I've got these two images up here. One shows the form if I'm on the code. One shows the code if I'm on the form. Okay, so now I have this subprocedure here. CMD OK, so that's the object, underscore mouse move, that's the event. Now, the mouse move actually passes us in some information. It tells us which button is down while the mouse is moving. It tells us if the shift key is down while the mouse is moving, and it tells us the X and Y coordinate with respect to the button as to where the mouse is doing the moving. And so each time that mouse move event happens, that set of information gets passed in here, and I could work with it. Here's what I'd like to do. I would just like to say this. If the mouse moves over this form at all, I'm going to say this. The name of my button, CMD OK, dot left. I'm going to change the left property of this button. It's going to take on a new value. What's it going to be? It's going to be a random number between 1 and 0 times the inside width of my form. So ME dot inside width. Only from the inside width and the outside width, there's a border on the form. The width of the form is the outside of the form. The inside width is just the area you have to work with your controls. So I'm going to change the left position of this button every time what? Every time the mouse moves even 1 pixel inside the border of the button. Here, let's not just do let's do the left, and then we'll do one more thing. So I'll go ahead and run this. I decide I want to click on that, and as soon as it receives that event, it does what I told it to do. It picks a random place. Now, is it possible for me to click on this button? Yes. What would it have? What would it take? Yeah, and you have to be careful here because you got to move just 1 pixel at a time. No, that's too far. But if it happens to move right under where the mouse is, yeah, you'd have to click before you move it again. Ah, got it. Okay, that was a pretty good exercise. So we don't want it to be that easy. So let's do something else. Actually, let's do one more thing. Let me kind of show just for kicks. At some point, I'm changing the left to be anywhere inside. There we go. So the left is anywhere, random number between the whole inside width of the form. So what's happened here? Yeah, it's actually pushed off the side. It could pick a random number that's the whole width, almost the whole width, and the button could disappear. I don't want that. And so here's what I'm going to do. I am going to say, not a random portion of that, but let's make it a random portion of the whole width minus the width of the button. CMD OK dot width. So that way, even if I get the highest value for my random number, it won't be the full inside width, it'll be the inside width minus how wide the button is. So the button will always be fully visible on the form. And just because it's fun, we'll do 2 more things, and then we'll move on to more meaningful experience. I'm going to also change the height. The top. To be, again, kind of same thing, inside height and minus the height of the button. So now it should just move, vertically and horizontally to a new spot. This would be a great thing to do, on April Fool's Day, to have this code only run when the day is April 1st. Oh, sure. Yeah. But all we'd have to do is change this code to say, to look at the date. Do you want to do it? Let me just show. We won't do it, but let me just show you how you would write code that does that. Yeah, it might not be a bad joke for Halloween coming up as well. That's just a week away. So you stop my code. Quiet down my speaker. So I can ask for the current time, the current date of the system clock now. Will tell me the current time. and I can ask for the day from that time, and that'll tell me it's the 24th day, and that is, it's the 24th day. I can also ask for the month of that time, and it returns the month. So I would just say if the day of now is equal to April 4, if 1, if the day is 1 and the month is 4 of the current date, then do the code that we have assigned here. That make sense? Okay. Let's do one more thing here, and that is each time we move it, cmdok.width equals cmdok.width minus 2. So what's that going to do? Every time it moves now, it's going to get just a little bit smaller. So now, you don't notice it straight at first, but after 4 or 5 times, Edna in accounting is going to be going, oh, wait a minute, is that button getting, it is. I better, oh no, what's going to happen if I don't get it in time? It's getting smaller. Oh no. This actually might end up having an error because it might try to set it, because I'm doing 2, it might end up trying to make it go below 0. So we might have to anticipate that. Still there. Yeah, that's probably only 1 pixel wide. I think this is going to give me an error. Oh, no, it didn't. So there we go. Gone. Is it gone? Oh, it's there. Just its width is 0. You can't see it. It's really hard to see something that has no width. So, okay. So, oh, but by the way, could I still, even if it's blank, could I still activate that button? Yeah, the Enter key. I did that on purpose. The Enter key still lets me trigger that button, even regardless of where the mouse is. Okay. So, but the whole point of this exercise, it's kind of fun, but the whole point of this exercise is to drive home the idea that we have a different way to think about triggering code. So far, we've only run code by a few ways. We've called the code from, like, just on our developer tab, listing our macros, saying run that macro. That's the way to do it. We've called the code, like, from the immediate window by typing the name of the procedure in there, and that will execute the code. We've called the code from a button. We can tie it to a button on the page, and we've called it from a hotkey. But now we got to think in a much more complex way, because now we can say we've got a whole set of objects and a whole set of events, and when an object and an event come together, we can make code respond to that combination. It's a different way to think about this. Okay, so now let's think about, we now need to get this information. See, we have an ID, we've got a place to put an ID and a place to put a name on the form. So think about it. In terms of object and event, where do we want to be able to write the code that says read the data off of the form and read the data off the worksheet and put it into the form? So take a look. Come to your code editor. I'll narrow it down. The object is going to be the user form. So come down here and choose user form. And then, it guessed at user form click. Is that the right event? What do you think it takes to trigger this event? To trigger the code that's here? Yeah, you just click somewhere on the user form, not on the button, not on one of the other controls, but on the background of the user form, that would trigger this code. That's not when I want to have it. So think about it. Look through the list of events. What do you think it is? Activate's a pretty good guess, but activate isn't, and you wouldn't know why it's not the right answer, but I'll explain it here in a second. I heard the right one. Initialize. So listen, the form can be in 3 different states. It can be not loaded into memory, just sitting as defined in the workbook, but not in memory. And that's just closed. This is not open. We can move that from being just defined in the workbook to being in memory, but not being displayed on the screen. The event that happens that gets us from closed to open but not being shown is initialize. Then, when that form actually becomes active, it becomes visible, it becomes the active form, that's when activate happens. And so for this example, if we chose either initialize or activate, that would be okay because we only have one form here, and when we open it, it's going to initialize and activate immediately. And so either one would be okay. But the reason we want to choose initialize here is that because if I have multiple forms, then when that form is, if I activate this form, the activate code, even if it's already open, the activate code is going to execute. And then activate this form again, that activate code is going to execute. And this is what we want, only this to execute the first time it gets read into memory. That's when we want it to do its thing. And again, as we'll see here, it's possible to hide the form, and then show it again. That would trigger the activate again. Okay? But we're going to do it on Initialize. So let's pick Initialize. And now we're going to have some code execute here when the user form initializes. So let's do this. I'm going to create for myself a module level variable that's just called the row. We're going to need to keep track of which row we're on. So let me just dim row as a long integer. And then here when we initialize, let's just set the row. Let's just say row equals, how do we figure out what row we want? Think about it. We're looking over here. How do I know? I'm right here. And I'm saying show the form. How do I know which? I got hundreds of rows here, hundreds of products. How do I know which one to show? Yeah, just the active cell. Wherever the active cell is, that must be the one they want to show. So active cell, it has a property called row, which just tells me the row number the active cell is on. And then let's do this. Let's call a subprocedure that we haven't written yet called ShowData. I'm going to come define this at the top. So it's just, we're going to have so much code here in ShowData, I'd like to have it be its own subprocedure. We'll make one for ShowData and one for SaveData as well. So let's define this one here. Sub ShowData. Now, row is a module level variable, so it got set down here in Initialize, and now we can refer to it here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say the name of my object, LBLID, that's the first object that we created, dot, what property do you think I had change of that label to be able to change what it's showing? It has a caption property. So that's going to equal, now if I look at my worksheets here, the one that's called products actually has a code name of data, so it's already named. So that's handy. So I can say data dot cells, row number row, column number 1. That's going to have that value in it. I'll do the same thing for my text box. txt name dot text equals, I think it's in column 6. So I'm just pulling off the same row, a different column. So now when I run this, depending on which row I have active, it should display the information into my form of the correct object. It's kind of a long name. Doesn't quite fit there. I'm going to go ahead and close this with the X. You'll see why here in just a minute. And I'm going to change to a different row and run it again. I'll go up to the very first one. Custom brass banded spec clear. And then I see that's product number 2, and then it has the name in there. Looks great. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say OK. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Do you remember what we said, what we did with the OK button? We said we want to hide this user form. When I hide the user form, it takes it from visible, makes it invisible, but leaves it stored in memory. I can still, if I have other code running, I can refer to the objects or the different controls that are on there, but it's not going to trigger the initialize again. So let me go ahead and hide this. I'm going to choose a different one and then run it again. And it's still showing row number 2 because it did not trigger the initialize event. So let's make one more change here. And that is, instead of hiding, I'm going to unload. So hide is a method of the object. The object is, in memory. We can just hide it. I'm going to say instead, unload me. So unload is actually a statement that's part of VBA. It says whatever object I give it here, it says just take that object out of memory. Just unload the object. And that will now run it completely out of memory. So I'm here on 303. I say OK. I go to some other row. I run it again. And because when I hit OK, it unloaded it, it's now going to pick up and say, oh, we've got to run the initialize code again because I'm initializing. I'm coming up just from being defined to being loaded into memory and then being visible. It's going to show that code again. Now, you'll notice that we can change this. The Sandhill Crane, I'll call this the Sandhill Crane call. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to save it. And what did that do to my data? It's still just the Sandhill Crane. Why? We never told it to do anything. And so let's go ahead and do that. So let me come back to the OK button. And before, it has to be before I unload. Any code I put after I say unload, what's going to happen to that code? It's not going to be executed because as soon as unload me happens, this thing is gone out of memory. And the next step it was going to try to do, also gone. So it's got to go before the unload me. Let's make another sub-procedure. Let's call this one save data. And I'm going to copy show data is going to be really similar to save data. So I'll just copy that one. I'll call this one save data. So tell me what I have to do differently. To show data, I'm reading the value off of the worksheet and writing it to the user form. For save data, what is it? It is the opposite. I'm going to take whatever's on the user form and write it out to the worksheet. Now, the user cannot change the label. And so I don't need to refer to the label. Right? No reason to try to route the label. The user can't change it. But the text name, the text, they can. So I'm just going to reverse the order of this line. So I'm going to set whatever my row is. In column 6, I'm going to set that to whatever the user has there in that text. So now I should be able to run this form, make a change on the data, hit OK, and it should change that in the data. So now it's not the Sandhill Crane, it's the Sandhill Crane call. Questions? Okay. This then is dealing with 3 controls. We've seen the label control, the text box control, and the button control. For this form to kind of be well built out, we've got several things that we want to change that are just these kind of text box things. And rather than try to build those out in class, I have given you user form called form product. So let's go ahead and close user form 1. And we are done with user form 1. And now let's go ahead and double click on our Project Explorer. Let's double click form product. So form product is more of the same. I have just given us a price, a place we can type in the price, a place we can type in the description, a place we can type in the discount. We've also got a cancel button that does similar to the OK button, but just doesn't save anything. These are already coded to save the code out, to save to populate and to save. So Mac users, you're getting this form okay? Are you able to open this form? Should just double click FRM product in the set of forms. Let's pause for a second and see if we can make sure that we're headed. Okay, so it turns out even while you're just editing the code behind a form, if you hit the play button, it'll show that form. So now we've got something similar here. I've got a few more labels here that have labeled the text areas, and we're pulling in the discount, the price, the name, and the description. Now, as it turns out, the description looks like we only have one line, and it even has like a paragraph mark showing here. So to be able to make, by default, text boxes will only show one line. You can make them tall, but they only show one line, unless you change another property. So let's go ahead and take a look at the property we have to change to make a text box show multiple lines. So I'll select that text box. I'll look at my properties. And there's a property called multi-line. And by default, it's false. I'll set it to true. And now, instead of showing the paragraph marks, it'll actually put a paragraph break. Have to have the form selected. Having the property of a form selected doesn't do it. You got to have the form or the code. And yeah, there's not very much on that one. Let me find one that's a little bit longer. This one right here. We'll run that form. There we got, multiple lines. So we can see those lines show up. So that's the multi-line property of the text box. I think as I was putting this example together, I think I stuck with hide on both the OK and the cancel button. So let's go ahead and change those from me.hide to unload me. So this is the cancel button. Ooh, I did a little more here in the click than let's talk through this code. Probably should have shown this example, built this example instead of just showing it to you. But let's go ahead and come down to where it says me.hide and let's change that to unload me. So this is what we had before, save data, then unload me. And here's one of the great things about a user form is that it lets us do data validation. I put this user form up, and the user can change data to his or her heart's content, but when he says OK, saying, all right, we're now ready to save that data, but we can check to make sure that what they typed in makes sense. Now what I'm doing here is I've got an object called txt discount. Can you guess what that is? It's the discount text box. That's where the user types in the text box, the discount. There are a couple of things that I want to know about a discount. What's the first one? Did they type in a number? It's got to be a number. Listen, if it's not a number, it's not the valid, it's got to be some number. And so we do this. They clicked OK, and before we say save, we're going to say, listen, if is numeric, the value of txt discount. If it is, we're going to do some other stuff. If it's not, we'll come here to the else. We'll just put up a message box, discount must be numeric, and then exit sub. Why exit sub? We don't want to hit the save data. We got to skip over this somehow. And there's other ways we could skip over it, but this is kind of a clean way. All right, now what if it is numeric? If it is numeric, we got another check. What would it mean to have a discount of 120%? We'll pay you to take this off our hands. And that might make sense in some context, but not for us here. And so we're going to say, listen, txt discount, the value of the discount's got to be, if it is greater than 100, or, txt discount, you go ahead and put dot value in there. What would happen if I didn't have the dot value in there? It'll work just fine because it's the default property for a text box. So it assumes I meant dot value, but I'd like to see it in there. So we're saying if it's greater than 100 or if it's less than 0, we'll just put up another message, a different message box. The discount's got to be between 0 and 100. There we go. And then exit the sub so we don't accidentally save the data when it's in its bad state. So that's data validation. That's one of the neat things that you can do with the user form. Let them type and then decide if you're going to save it or not based on what they've typed in. Take a close look at it. Okay. So in terms of show data, nothing new here. We're showing the caption, text, name. Oh, one thing is that our discount is actually shown as like 0.5 for 50% discount, but we'd like to show it to the user as actually 50. So I'm reading whatever is in the worksheet and I'm multiplying it by 100 as I'm putting it in there. So 0.5 will turn to 50. Similarly, when I go to save it, I've got to take whatever's in the text box and divide it by 100 to get it into the right format in my worksheet. Okay, so that's kind of what we've done so far with these two control types, which are, or these three. We've done labels, text boxes, and buttons. Now let's do some that are a little bit more complex. Next one I want to see is the manufacturer. So for our manufacturer, I'm not going to just have folks typing in a manufacturer. Instead, we're going to have them pick the manufacturer from a list. And there are several options that I have to pick something off of a list. So let me start just by taking a peek over here at my tab that has lists on it. And I've got here a whole set of manufacturers in column E. And so I would like to present a drop-down list box for someone to choose the manufacturer that they want to put here. So that's a different kind of control. That control is the next control over. It's called a combo box. So I'll select the combo box, and I'll come here to manufacturer, and then I will click and drag to put that manufacturer in here. So that combo box in here. And you'll see it looks like a text box with a little drop-down list by it. It's a combo box. Actually, a combo box because it's a combination of a text box and a list box. The list box will go away when we're not showing it, but we'll work with a list box as well. Okay, so a couple things we have to think about when we're getting the combo box set up. First one is we've got to somehow tell it what are the list of possible values. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to tell it to select one of those values based on what is currently shown in the data. So step one, let's put the list into the combo box. Talk to me in terms of object and event. Where do I want to have the values get populated into the combo box? Object and event, where is it? When do I want the list of possible values to go in? Yeah, probably when we initialize it. So as soon as we're getting this form set up, we're reading it out of memory. We're reading it into memory, putting it into memory. That would be a good time to go ahead and populate that. Well, we're already doing ShowData, so why don't we make that part of ShowData? So I'm going to come up to ShowData. I can remember how to get there. Here we go, ShowData. And I'll just put a comment here for the combo box. Oh, but before I start coding it, I want to make sure I've got a name on it. So let me go back and name it. This will just be CBO manufacturer. Or maybe CBO MFR. As we know, the less I type, the better it is for everybody. Okay, so now we've got to see how to do this. Oh, here's how we put a value into the combo box. Name of the combo box, CBOMFR dot, and there's a method called add item. I then give it the text that I want to add in, and we're in good shape. So I've got a worksheet called lists, and I want that to look at the cells, row number 1, column number, is it column number 5? Yeah, manufacturers in column E, so that's 5. This is going to add one item into the combo box. Whoever that first manufacturer is. Who is it? Cut down calls. So if I run this, that should come up now, and it should have an item in the list. Whoops. Oh, row 1 is the header. I wanted row 2. Let's go back to the code. And should be row number 2. And there's my one manufacturer. I only have to do that one time for each manufacturer. Anything coming to mind here on how I might do this? Yeah, let's just make a loop. This is a similar, we've made similar loops quite often. So inside of my ShowData, let me declare a variable, dim r as a long. We'll start r out, r equals 2, do until lists dot cells r comma 5 dot value is blank. I'm going to now do r instead of 2. I'll increment r. I'll do events and loop. That should do the trick. Question here?
Yeah, just wondering if there's a problem using the row variable at the module level instead of r.
Ah, good question. So we declared this variable r here to be able to work through this loop. Well, we already have a variable set up to work, reference to a rows. It's called row. Could we just use that? What do you think? Let's think about what happens as we go through this. So initialize is down here. This gets called. We say, look at the active row, and then save that in my variable, then show data. So at that point, if I'm on row number 6, row is 6. I then get here. I load up all this information. So I've used row to do all this. And now we could set row to 2 and then use that to go through here. That would be okay, except after we get this value, this set of values in here, we're going to have to set the value of my combo box equal to whatever value is in the row. And so we're going to still need to remember that row variable. In fact, that's going to be next. So let me just go ahead and do this. And this is, there's a couple of different ways that I can pick an item off of the list in my combo box. One is to just set the value of the combo box equal to one of the items that's in the list. And then that will choose that item from the list. The other way is a little more complicated, and we'll get to it with a different example. CBO MFR dot value equals data dot cells sub row comma wherever the manufacturer is. I don't know. Manufacturer is in column number 4. Assuming that the manufacturer on that row is in the list, then it will just select that item in the list. Question? So we're going to run through this loop to add all the items from the list. We'll see what, I have some error here. We'll see that, check that out in a minute. This is going to load up the whole list, and then this should pick one of those. CBO MFR dot value equals data dot cells. Oh, I got a dot right here that doesn't belong. Thank you. All right, so now if I run this, yeah, so cut down calls is shown here. And as I drop down that list, we can see that cut down calls is selected. That was the first one. Let's pick one that's not the first one and make sure that works that way too. So this should be Flambeau. And there's Flambeau. And we can see it is selected in the list when it drops down. So we've got our manufacturer put in. I feel pretty good about it. Here's the show data code right here. Whoops, sorry. Going back. Show data. Save data is going to be really easy here because all we have to do is just look at the value that's in the combo box and write it out. So that's going to be exactly parallel to what we did with the text box. So let's go ahead and add that to our save data. So that's row number 4. Or it's column number 4, whatever the current row is equal to CBO MFR dot value. And so now if I pick a different manufacturer off the list, it'll save that manufacturer out into the row. Whew, how are we doing, folks? How many of you are saying, wow, this is a lot to bite off in one day? I agree. But we got 7 minutes, so let's add some more. There's lots of different ways to choose things from a list. This is a dynamic list, right? All we have to do for this to be updated is put more data into our list of manufacturers, and that will read straight away. So anytime I've got a list that seems like it's going to change pretty often, or at all, it's probably a good way to do it. But the downside to this is that it takes 2 clicks to change, right? I've got to drop down the list, maybe even scroll, and then select the one that I'm after. If I have options that just aren't going to change, I can just kind of display them all on the screen at once and just make the choice. That's what option buttons are for. Let's take a look. So back here in my form, I'm going to make a collection of option buttons. And you've seen these, right? They're like sometimes called radio buttons because when you select one of them, it unselects whatever other one used to be selected. Now, if I look at my set of lists here, I have a department that only has 4 different departments: hunting, outdoor, general, and apparel. We're not planning on adding any departments ever. I can imagine where we would. And if we did add departments, with the approach I'm taking, you would have to change the code. You have to come in and actually recode the form. It's not just a matter of changing data. So anytime you take this approach, you're saying, wow, if this list changes, I'm going to have someone who knows VBA come in here and change the code. Whereas the combo box, all you have to do is put more data in it, and the code's ready to go. Okay, to do this, it takes 2 things. And so the first thing is called a frame. The frame, oh, I can barely see it, and I'm looking right at it. Where's the frame? List box, oh, here it is. So here's the frame. It looks like a little square with an X and a Y, or a Y and a Z or something there. So I'm going to take that frame, and I'm going to draw that frame kind of right in here. I'm going to change the name from frame 1 to FRM department, DEPT, FRM debit. And I will change the caption to say department. Now, inside this frame, I want to put my 4 option buttons. The option button is this one that looks like a bullseye. I'll just click and drag to bring my first option button in here. The frame is not just for looks. The frame binds this set of option buttons together as a mutually exclusive set. And so, if I have 2 different sets of option buttons, clicking one isn't going to reset, it'll reset the others from inside that frame, but not others in another frame. So the frame is not just for looks, it actually binds those into a set of option buttons. And I'm going to give myself 4 of these. So I just did a copy and paste. I'll see if I can get them spaced equally in here. All right. Now I'm going to configure each one of these. One for each of those departments. So first one, I will name whatever my first department was. This will be OPT. Apparel. Hunting. Oh, they're not alphabetical. APPAREL, general, outdoor, and hunting. Oh, so my caption will be APPAREL. We'll get the next one set up. What was it? General? Oh, apparel, hunting, outdoor, and general. Apparel, hunting, OPT, hunting. Whew. Caption, hunting. OPT, outdoor. Caption, outdoor. And then general. Whew. Looks like it's wider than it needs to be, but we'll let that go. Maybe we'll move them over a bit. Maybe we'll leave them right where they are. Okay, let's see if we can at least get this so that they populate. We won't get them, I have time to get them so they save. But let's go ahead and try to get our show data set up. Okay, so here's our option buttons. I'm going to do this as a case statement. Select case, and I'm looking for whichever column has my department in it. What is that, column 2 or 3? Does anyone have the data handy? Sounds like it's 3. We have in the mouth of 2 witnesses it has been established. Okay, so select case, looking at whatever value is in our current row, column 3, and select. Now we'll just have case. If what's in there is equal to apparel, am I spelling that right? A-P-P-A-R-E-L, yeah. What do we want to do? OPT apparel equals dot value equals true. OPT-A-P-P-A-R-E-L. That should have capitalized if I had it spelled right. Oh, the value isn't right. Still, my OPT apparel isn't right. Something's funny. OPT, APP, oh, I have ERAL. AREL. There we go. So if it's apparel, then set apparel to true. If it's general, set general to true. If it's hunting, set hunting to true. If it's anything else, set the other one to true. That make sense? And so that will select it. Making it true is what makes it selected. All right, I'll go ahead and fill this part of the example out, and we'll pick up here when we start again next Monday. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed.